why you should never judge a book by its cover or necessarily a talk.
There you go. That's the way to look at it. Well, I think that we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. This is part of an ongoing webinar series exploring the practical applications of culinary medicine, taking it from the classroom to your kitchen. My name is Brianna. I'm the online marketing coordinator at the University of Montana, and I'll be helping facilitate our session today. Just to give you a brief overview of what to expect, I'll first introduce our speaker, and then we'll get into determining whether or not that tasty summer barbecue tradition is deemed perilous or not, which is where the real fun begins. If time permits, at the end of our session, we'll open the floor for questions. So if you do have a question, please locate the chat feature icon at the bottom of your screen and enter your question there, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker. He's a cardiologist, professional chef, author, and college professor. Please welcome Dr. Michael Fenster.
Thanks, Brianna. Hey, do you have it recording? I wanted to check before I get going.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Thank you, Brianna. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Practical Culinary Medicine webinar for June about grilling, barbecue, and smoking because we are in the season. As Brianna mentioned, I am Chef Dr. Mike, and as you can see, we have our presentation already fired up. And I am so excited, and I can't wait to get the fire lit on this one because it is one of my favorite topics. But before we get started, I want to take a few minutes and cover some quick housekeeping. So firstly, let me thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. We certainly appreciate your interest, support, and sharing of our culinary medicine program and the information it provides. And if this is something that speaks to you or you're just curious to know more and have not already, please visit the website www.chefdrmike.com. That's chefdrmike.com, where you can learn all about culinary medicine, peruse the blogs, check out the information, the recipes, and also learn more about the course we offer here at the University of Montana. The Introduction to Culinary Medicine course we teach here is a 100% online opportunity. For medical professionals, it qualifies for 36 level 1 CMEs, and for culinary professionals, it qualifies for 30 CEUs that are offered by the American Culinary Federation. But you don't have to be a medical or culinary professional to take this course. One of the fundamental principles of our culinary medicine approach is that it is for anyone and everyone. So it's ultimately, you determine the culinary medicine approach that's right for you, because culinary medicine is all about empowering you as the individual to reestablish, reforge, and reconnect your personal relationship with the food you eat. And that also includes the techniques we use to prepare that food. So with that being said, let's take a closer look at grilling, barbecue, and smoking. Let's start with grilling. So grilling involves cooking directly over a hot heat source. In some cases, that's directly over fire, and it's usually for a relatively short amount of time. So if you've been in your kitchen and you've used your oven broiler, think of it as cooking with your oven broiler, but in reverse, where the heat source is on the bottom. What we really want to remember about grilling as a cookery method is that it is hot and quick. This method of food preparation, for example, taking a piece of meat and roasting it over an open fire, it's among the oldest, if not perhaps the oldest method of cooking. Such cookery is a defining characteristic of humanity. Some propose it is the defining human characteristic because humans are the only species on the planet that cooks its food. And if grilling was the first food preparation technique, certainly smoking wasn't far behind. Throughout prehistory, antiquity, and even today for many tribal and indigenous peoples around the world, hunting, gathering, grilling, and smoking remain the major methods of food preparation. In many areas of Africa today, grilling to cook and the use of smoking to preserve foods remains the major techniques employed, and smoking is the most important method for fish and game preservation in Africa. Why this is important is because if the techniques per se of grilling and smoking were so toxic, we should be able to see it manifest in such populations in terms of certain types of cancers, inflammatory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and the like. However, what we actually observe is the opposite. What we find is that these populations have incredibly low rates of such disability and disease when compared to societies that embrace the modern Western diet or the standard American diet, or as I think it's most appropriately known, the SAD. One reason for an absence of any ill effect may have to do with our gut microbiome. Harvard professor Richard Wrangham, author of a most excellent book, Catching Fire, How Cooking Made Us Human, definitely check that out if you get a chance, and other scientists as well, have proposed that the key may lie in our bellies. Their hypothesis is that the human gut microbiome is incredibly unique in all the animal kingdom. And that's because it's co-evolved to co-metabolize our foods over the millennia. And that includes cooked foods like those that are grilled and smoked. And there appears actually that there may be some truth to this. It's an area that's under an active investigation because we're really just beginning to scratch the tip of the iceberg that is the gut microbiome and our relationship to it. And that ability of our digestive system and the gut microbiome to handle the foods we eat and the wide varieties of the way we prepare them ranges from grilling at one extreme to smoking or barbecue at the other. Both smoking and barbecue involve the use of smoke and relatively low temperatures to cook food. Now, technically, from a culinary perspective, barbecue generally involves a closed environment. And in antiquity, and even today in some societies and cultures, for example, you might dig a pit, line it with rocks, light a fire as a heat source, put in your food, cover it back up, and leave it for a long time, sometimes even a day or more before you uncover it and enjoy a delicious feast. Smoking obviously can be done in an open air environment. What's important to take away is that in opposition to the hot and quick method associated with grilling food, smoking and barbecue is low and slow. And such a method yields that southern gift to humanity, the pork barbecue. And I briefly want to touch on two specific terms to avoid confusion, because when we talk about smoking, you're going to hear about it being done hot, which actually has less to do with precise temperature and more to do with the fact that when the smoking process is done, the food is fully cooked. So an example of the pork barbecue we talked about that is hopefully tempting you on the slide, that's an example of hot smoking. At the other end of the spectrum from hot smoking is something called cold smoking, obviously. And here the goal is not to cook the food, but just to add the smoky flavor. And as we mentioned previously, some of those preservation type benefits. In this case, when the ingredient comes off the smoker, you still need to cook it again before it's ready to eat. And an example of that, something everybody's familiar with, is bacon. And although we've covered a few of the technical differences, for the purposes of discussion here moving forward, I want to treat barbecue and all forms of smoking, both hot and cold, in the same context and essentially use them interchangeably. No matter the method, barbecue, hot smoking, cold smoking, smoking likely originated as a method of food preservation. Now, wood smoke produces over 400 distinct volatile chemical compounds, and the smoking process most definitely incorporates them into the foodstuffs. In a study that was, of course, done by the French, looking at smoked duck breast, over 62 different volatile chemical components were identified, and 34 of those, or more than 50%, more than half of them, were a result of the smoking process. So, besides adding flavor, and much like herbs and spices, many of the molecules that are derived from wood smoke directly combat two of the major causes of food spoilage, which are microbial degradation and oxidation. So, in simple terms, utilizing wood smoke infuses food with antimicrobials and antioxidants, which we hear so much about as a class of compounds that yield health benefits, in addition to giving us fantastic flavors. Now, I want to take a moment here and apologize for a diversion of sorts. In our culinary medicine approach, we speak about connecting to the roots of our food, about where it comes from and how it got here. And quite frankly, the only thing better than talking about food, grilling, and barbecue is talking about food, grilling, barbecue, and pirates. Yes, pirates. While in the 19th century, the word buccaneer became synonymous with the word pirate and remains so today, at the time of the word's origin in the 17th century, it referred to something much more specific. The word buccaneer derives from the Arawak word bucan. The Arawak were the native peoples of South America and the Lesser Antilles Islands in the Caribbean. Their word bucan refers to the apparatus that was used to smoke meat and fish. And thus, the people that used the smoking method were known as buccaneers. And these buccaneers were comprised mostly of escaped servants, former soldiers, and mostly men of French, Dutch, or English extraction. And they inhabited the predominantly wild and sparsely inner regions of Jamaica, Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and Tortuga. And hunting, particularly hunting feral cows and wild pigs, was the mainstay of their existence. Now, once you hunted, killed, and butchered these animals, you needed to preserve them. And as you all know, the Caribbean is a very hot, humid, and tropical environment. This means that any fresh meat is going to start to spoil very, very quickly. And we talked about just previously how smoking is a great method of preservation. So, what these buccaneers would do is cut the meat into thin strips, dry it out, and then smoke it on their bucans. They not only used this as food, but it was also a type of currency for them to sell and trade for other items. And, the story might well have ended here with a happily ever after, except for one thing: the Spanish. The islands that I mentioned had been claimed and colonized by the Spanish. And here is where we get the connection between pirates and barbecue. The Spanish word for the bucan used by the buccaneers is barbacoa. And it is from this word, barbacoa, that we derive our modern English word, barbecue. And as I mentioned, during this colonial period in history, Spain had claimed much of this region in the New World. And their perspective was that this was now their land and they owned it and they'd rule it as they saw fit. A case of might makes right, if you will. That meant that the native peoples and groups like the Buccaneers were neither respected nor treated very well, to say the least. And as you can imagine, these differing perspectives and rather harsh treatment by the Spanish ultimately led to conflict. The Buccaneers and the indigenous peoples who were not only treated poorly by the Spanish, but they also had to sit and watch on the sidelines as the Spanish amassed vast riches by exploiting the region's resources and people. The Buccaneers, and many times in alliance with these native peoples, took to raiding the rich Spanish coastal cities and other Spanish possessions throughout the Spanish Main. And this was initially greeted with much enthusiasm support from the French and the English and the Dutch in the region because they were no fans of the Spanish. However, over time, the buccaneers became, shall we say, a bit more inclusive and they took to pillaging everyone. This was then frowned upon by the English, French, and Dutch and viewed by them as acts of piracy, which of course it actually was. And this is why, over time, the term buccaneer or our modern buccaneer became synonymous with pirate. Thus, we could say that some of the world's original pitmasters gave rise to the golden age of piracy and the Pirates of the Caribbean. And it's also why, if you have ever read Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson, which is a literary milestone in pirate lore and fiction, you'll now understand why one of the world's most famous fictional pirates, Long John Silver, is sometimes referred to as Barbecue. It's because he began his career as a buccaneer. And whilst pirates, both fictional and real, like the infamous Captain Black Bart Roberts, may have enjoyed barbecue and at the same time subscribe to, as he put it, a short life and a merry one, we today, and especially we in culinary medicine, like to take a longer view of things. So when it comes to grilling, smoking, and barbecue, one of our primary concerns about using these cooking methods is a concern over increasing our risks for certain types of cancers. Now, the concern over cancer primarily deals with two particular classes of compounds. Those are heterocyclic amines, or HCAs or HAs, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAH. Now, it's important to note that HCAs or HAs are not found in any significant amounts in foods other than meat or fish cooked at high temperatures. PAHs, on the other hand, can be found in a variety of smoked foods, as well as in other sources that we'll touch on shortly. Vegetables can contain PAHs or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons prior to smoking, depending on where they are grown, how they are processed, and where they are prepared, as they can be contaminated with environmental pollutants like nitro PAHs, which are ubiquitous in urban areas and are also found in many agricultural commodities. And the other important thing to realize about these two compounds, both HCAs or HAs and PAHs, is that they become capable of damaging DNA only after they are metabolized by specific enzymes in our bodies. And this is a process called bioactivation. And studies have shown that the activity of these enzymes that convert these compounds to their active forms, where they can do damage, differ widely among different people. I mentioned that heterocyclic amines, or HAs, are produced by the high temperatures of cooking methods like grilling and broiling. They're also present in foods that are smoked or barbecued, but even when we look at heavily smoked foods, the concentrations of these HAs are incredibly small, and they're generally lower than 1 nanogram per gram of food. And realize that a nanogram is 1 times 10 to the minus ninth. So they're wee bits. And a study done at the University of California some years ago estimated sort of a worst case scenario. What's the very worst that eating these types of food with HAs could increase our risk of cancer? And the number they came up with was 0.011%. And to put that in perspective, those are about the same odds that you will seriously injure yourself on a toilet this year, or you will walk out the door and find a 4-leaf clover on the first try. Now, unlike the HAs, or heterocyclic amines, which require high temperatures to form, The polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, form when juices from meat or fish hit a hot surface, and then those compounds are carried back into the proteins in the form of smoke, and they end up permeating the food. And the main risk to human consumption appears to come from 15 specific polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And these 15 are potentially genotoxic and carcinogenic. These particular PAHs, these 15 PAHs, belong to a subclass known as heavy PAHs. And this label describes compounds with a molecular weight greater than 216 Daltons. The good news for us is that, however, the PAHs derived from wood smoke consist of compounds that belong to the lower molecular weight species that are less than 216 Daltons. And the analysis of the potential ill health effects from grilling and barbecue and smoking is further complicated by a number of confounders. So, as we spoke about, one difficulty with conducting such studies is that it can be really difficult to determine the exact level of HCA and or pH exposure a person gets from cooked meats. This is because, as I just mentioned, there is substantial individual variation in the activity of the enzymes that metabolize these two compounds, the HCAs and the PAHs. As we discussed previously, this is the necessary step that converts these molecules from harmless bystander into internal terrorist. That means there's a substantial exposure difference even amongst people who ingest or take in the same amounts of these compounds. And to further complicate things, people may be exposed to PAHs from other environmental sources, just not the beyond just the food that they eat. So PAHs are found in such diverse sources as volcanoes and cigarette smoke. They are also produced by car exhaust. And so if you live in a heavily urban environment or just sit in a traffic a lot each day, you might be exposed to a lot more PAHs from these sources than you ever would be from eating some pork barbecue. Additionally, PAHs can be found in significant concentrations in some regions in the groundwater, and thus can be delivered to us in other forms, such as the water itself, or manifest in cereals, fruits, vegetables, cow's milk, and it can even be found in human breast milk. But the important takeaway at the end of today, besides obviously the tie to piracy and barbecue, is that despite the many studies, including population studies, to date, there has been no definitive link established between HCA, heterocyclic amine, and PAH, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon exposure from cooked meats and cancer in humans. And as for the studies that claimed to show a causal effect in terms of increased risk of certain types of cancers from the consumption of these types of food, most of these were done in the early to mid 1970s. And in retrospect, they were highly flawed. The National Cancer Institute recognized that the dosages used in feeding the animals in these studies were absolutely outrageous. As an example, these animals were being given the equivalent of a person eating anywhere from 278 to 556 pounds of bacon at a single sitting, every meal, every day. I love bacon, but I gotta admit, that's a bit much even for me. So, I hope you've enjoyed this whirlwind tour and chat about grilling, barbecue, smoking, and the golden age of piracy as much as I have. And I hope it at least lessens any stress at your next gathering. In fact, I hope it encourages you to hoist the colors and enjoy a meal that is steeped in tradition and seasoned with adventure. And with all due deference to Captain Black Bart Roberts, may your life be a merry one and long. So thanks for hanging in there, staying and sailing with us today. And as always, this webinar, along with all our other webinars and videos, will be available on our YouTube page, and the link to that is available at chefdrmike.com. Cheers and thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining. We hope to see you next time.